difficulties, and that's not hard for me, but the first thing this morning, we have Vermont new electric vehicle incentive programs. And we got Michelle and Daniel and Dave Roberts. So who wants to lead off this morning? Michelle or?
Yeah,
Okay,
Senator
go right
Mazza,
ahead.
I'm happy
Thank you.
to take the lead.
Go right ahead. Thank you.
My remarks will be brief. The real experts are others in the room here. And I'm Michelle Boomhauer, the Director of Policy Planning and Intermodal Development for the Agency of Transportation. And we're going to give you more of an in-depth briefing on how the incentive programs are going this morning, starting with the new EV incentive program, and that is the incentive program for new vehicles. And Dan Dutcher is with me from AOT, and he's the environmental policy manager, and he also has been overseeing the deployment of this program and all of the logistics in coordination with our partner Dave Roberts from Drive Electric Vermont. This program also includes support from the distribution utilities who act as our fiscal agents to pass monies through to the dealerships who are participating in the program. And so you'll hear a little bit more about the role of the utilities as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dan to start, and then Dave will have a few remarks as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Hey,
all right, Dan.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. For the record, Dan Dutcher, Environmental Policy Manager, Vermont Agency of Transportation. We've got quite a lineup this morning. What I'll do, if it pleases the committee, is emphasize the new plug-in electric vehicle program, incentive program, but also touch on the other ones. They're sort of all interconnected. So I'll give you the broad picture, emphasis on the new PEV incentive program, and then later on you'll be able to drill into the details of Mileage Smart with Capstone and the emissions repair program with DEC.
So Dan, this will be all the incentives that are available out there. You're going to list them all, or?
Yes, all the statewide incentives. There are also utility incentives, which we won't get into unless there are questions on that.
Okay.
But, so to just get it started and to respond to your question a little further, Senator Mazza, the 2019 transportation bill created these three incentive programs. The first is a new plug-in electric vehicle incentive program. And as Michelle said, it was a new program, but the new actually describes the vehicle, not the program. It's for new cars. And second, there was a used fuel efficient vehicle incentive program, and that's now known as Mileage Smart. And the third program created by the 2019 transportation bill was an emissions repair incentive program. And as the 2019 and 2020 transportation bills require, VTrans did file a full report evaluating the effectiveness of the programs, and I believe that's now posted on your website. And it's quite a detailed analysis, and the attachments include the various agreements that we entered into with our partners, and the guidelines, for example, for the new PEV incentive program, pretty much more than you would ever probably want to know, but it's all there for reference, and I'll provide a summary now. $50,000 of funding available to administer all three programs. And we found out early on that this wasn't going to be nearly enough to retain contractors at market rates to run these programs, and we didn't have the in-house capacity. So to make the most of the funding available, VTrans needed to get creative. We mentioned the sort of dilemma we were kind of looking at as a result of this funding shortfall early on. I think it was actually at a Drive Electric Vermont stakeholders meeting, and it was Green Mountain Power that came up with the idea of the utilities working with us without cost to help us administer the programs. And that really made everything possible that we've been able to accomplish so far. What we did was we took the entire $150,000 and we decided to allocate that to Capstone Community Action to run the used fuel efficient incentive program known as Mileage Smart, and also the emissions repair program. And then we got the new PEV incentive program going through no-cost contracts with the state's distribution utilities. And basically there's 7 of them. One of them is VPSA, the Vermont Public Power Supply Authority, and they represent a number of municipal utilities, I believe around 11. So we were dealing with 7 organizations. Everybody was very cooperative, but it was quite a process, you know, to get 7 organizations to agree on the terms and conditions of these no-cost contracts, you know, figure out who was going to do what. But we did get through that. And just to give you a little further background, before we went with the utilities for these no-cost contracts, we did use a simplified bid process to try to find a contractor. And the only responsive bid came in at $250,000 just to run the new PEV incentive program. And that was by an organization that runs these programs in a number of other states. So, you know, that blew the budget right there. And that's what caused us to, you know, explore other options. We did enter into a grant agreement with VEIC, which runs Drive Electric Vermont, and Dave Roberts is here with us. He's the coordinator of Drive Electric Vermont. DEV has been an indispensable partner in this. We entered into a grant agreement with DEV to help coordinate everything, because we've got the utilities, we've got the dealers, you know, the consumers, of course, and how is this all going to get strung together? And DEV helped us develop the guidelines, which you can find on DEV's website. They're pretty complicated. The various application forms and just endless sort of logistical administrative type questions that, you know, we needed to get through in order to launch this, and that we've actually continued to deal with on a pretty regular basis. To fund a grant agreement with Drive Electric Vermont, we got $50,000 of air quality settlement money from ANR, which they transferred to us. And in addition, we have a sort of annual grant agreement that a number of agencies contribute to help support Drive Electric Vermont's general vehicle electrification services. And we allowed Drive Electric Vermont to draw that down by $13,000 to help administer this program in the first year. So that was about $63,000 that we got to help support this program outside the $150,000 initially allocated. So we did get everything up and running. We launched the new PEV incentive program in December 2019. Initial program incentive funding was $1.1 million. And that was actually fully drawn down by October 1st, 2020. So in less than a year, the program paid out $1.1 million of incentives, and that's pretty remarkable, you know, considering what that year looked like for the auto industry. So this, you know, tells us how successful the program has been, and something about the demand out there for electric vehicles and the need for people to have, you know, a little assistance to overcome that higher upfront cost. When the funds were drawn down on October 1st, VTrans had to suspend the program because there were, you know, no more funds to pay out. Right around that time, actually the next day on October 2nd, the 2020 Transportation Bill and Appropriations Bill well, the appropriations bill took effect. So, we didn't have a lot of lead time to, basically close that gap. We didn't have a way to avoid suspending the program. And, unfortunately, the suspension there for about a month did create a bunch of confusion. Consumers had a lot of questions and so forth, and some sort of got caught up in that. But we were able to get the program relaunched. The new funding scheme allocated, I think, up to $100,000 for administration for this program. And we negotiated an amended grant agreement with Drive Electric Vermont for $50,000, to continue running the program, and amended no-cost contracts with the distribution utilities. The 2020 transportation bill advised us to continue with no-cost contracts with the utilities, and we did that, and they were willing to do it. But it shouldn't just be assumed that the utilities are going to want to continue to do this going forward. They may, I haven't heard anyone say that they won't, but this is something that they need to be kind of consult with if we're going to keep going in this fashion. And VTrans has reached out to them. Michelle just sent a note out to the distribution utilities maybe yesterday or the day before to ask them what they might be willing to do. And is there a question?
Yeah, Senator Mazza.
Yes, go ahead, Senator Perchlik.
Dan, can you tell me, when you say then the distribution utilities, is it just 2 or 3 of them? How many of the, whatever we have, 16?
It's all of them. It's all 7, including VIPSA, which is an organization of the 11 or so municipal utilities.
Okay.
So we have statewide coverage, and the way the program works is that the consumer can get the incentive in 2 ways. Probably the best way for the consumer is to get it through the dealer. They show up, and there's the dealer, if they're participating in the program, and many dealers are, they'll provide the consumer with an application form, and it's pretty easy. I think it's 2 pages, 1 page front and back, and the consumer essentially self-reports their eligibility through their income and so on, and then the dealer would just take the incentive off the down payment, and then the dealer would invoice the distribution utility in the consumer's service territory, or their utility in wherever they live. And then after the utility reimburses the dealer, the utility then invoices VTrans, which reimburses the utility. So it's kind of complicated.
Yeah. Is that how the utility incentive is done too? Do you know? Do they just, the dealer takes it off? So those distribution utilities that offer an incentive, like GMP, the dealer would also take that off.
I think there's a mix. Dave Roberts would be able to back me up on this. There may be a couple of them that do that, but for the others, you have to buy the car and then get sort of the voucher after the fact from the utility.
Are these 100% electric, or are they hybrids?
It would be any plug-in vehicle. So it could be the 100% electric, which we would call a battery electric vehicle, or an all-electric vehicle, or a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. The program does not cover conventional hybrid vehicles that don't plug in, because that's really considered actually conventional technology, established technology at this point.
Okay.
And it's not where we want to go as a matter of public policy.
So the incentive is the same for a plug-in hybrid as it is for a total electric? No,
Nope,
Okay.
it's always been higher
higher for the electric.
for the electric.
Okay, thank
Yeah,
you.
and it's a bit higher if your income is lower as well.
I see. Okay,
Okay,
that's good. Thank you.
sure. And so that's one way that the consumer can get the incentive is from the dealer, right off down payment. But the program does give the consumer a second option. And that is to go ahead and purchase the vehicle and then submit proof of purchase to the utility. And then the utility would pay the consumer and then invoice, V-Trans for reimbursement.
And the person getting money from utility, it has to be in that utilities district. Is that correct?
Yes, that's
Okay.
right.
If it's Green Mountain Power or some
Right.
other company, I see. And they have
You know-
different rebates on different utilities, or they're all the same?
It's the same statewide incentive
Okay.
all over the state. And you don't have to be a utility customer, so you don't have to
Nice,
present
okay.
it just depends on what your address is,
But
Okay.
there are utility incentives on top of the statewide incentive.
Yeah, they can be stacked right on.
Okay. Okay.
That's right.
Good.
And
Any other
you know,
questions before we move on? Is there a question? Senator Chittenden, do you have a question? No, you're all set. Okay, go ahead. Thank you, Dan.
Sure. So the reason why we provide the second option, the sort of reimbursement option, is because some people are interested in buying Teslas, for example, where there are no dealers in Vermont. And so that allows them to benefit from this incentive program. And some people may just not want to complicate their deal at the dealer. There's a lot of numbers flying around. They might just want to make their deal and then go ahead and get the incentive on their own. It's not as good, probably financially, for the consumer to go with reimbursement instead of a lower down payment, because if they get reimbursement, they get the tax liability because the payment's going to them instead of the dealer. And they also might have to get a bigger loan in order to get the car in the first place. But consumers have that option, and quite a number have exercised it. So to just, I guess, pick up where we left off before the questions, we relaunched the program after this gap in November 2020, and we allocated up to $50,000 of administrative funding made available to go with an amended grant agreement with VEIC, and then we got amended no-cost contracts with the utilities. As I think the new incentive funding available was, I guess we have about $950,000 that we started with after we entered into the new VEIC contract. And that is already drawn down to about $517,000 as of a couple of days ago. So the program continues to be popular. As the committee knows, the transportation sector generates more greenhouse gas emissions than any other sector in the nation, and especially in Vermont, because we have a relatively clean power production sector. And actually in Vermont, transportation accounts now for close to half of our greenhouse gas emissions. And obviously numerous strategies are important for addressing these emissions from the transportation sector. And these include various transportation demand management strategies to get people out of single occupancy vehicles and to try to use active transportation like bikes and pedestrian type facilities and so forth. And all that's important. V-Trans has been working on those strategies for years and will continue to do that. But the quickest and most cost-effective and comprehensive way to reduce greenhouse gases from the transportation sector is by electrifying the entire transportation system. And this is inevitably going to happen. I think virtually anybody at this point would agree that the whole fleet is going to flip. But really the game now is not if, but when. And this incentive program is very important for trying to accelerate that process to help us meet our greenhouse gas mitigation requirements. So we have about 4,000 plug-in electric vehicles registered in Vermont now, and over 7% of new passenger vehicle registrations are now electric. But overall, if you look at the fleet that's on the road, probably less than 1% of the entire vehicle fleet in Vermont is actually electric. So I do think we're on a precipice, and we're going to start seeing things happen very, very quickly as the technology has continued to improve and as prices go down, and especially as the manufacturers have been redoubling their commitments, and they have plans to come out with many more vehicle models, which I think will, appeal to a broader spectrum of Vermonters. But this kind of program is important to, accelerate that process and increase the market share of electric vehicles.
Dan, one thing I hear over and over again in my contact in the store is that people aren't prepared until they have charging stations that they can count on every 30 miles or whatever the ratio, because they're uncertain about how far they can go, if they want to go to Boston, if they want to go somewhere. So I think we have to put a big emphasis on charging stations because they want that certainty. And I don't blame them, unless they got a hybrid, of course, but a total electric, and they got to have a quick charge, whatever that, I don't understand this whole thing, but whatever that is, a quick charge. They don't want to wait for 2 hours or 4 hours. So those are the things that I think are very important. I don't know if anybody else agrees or disagrees, but until we do that and really emphasize that part of it, just like right now, you can go anywhere with a gas car because you can stop anywhere and get gas. I mean, you don't have to worry about it, but the charging station. So what's the prediction or plan? A year or 2 years on charging stations, or 2 months? Or
I think it's a lot longer term than that. It's going to be a sort of a ongoing process probably for the next several years for the state to fund charging stations until market forces really take over. But we're actually doing a great job in Vermont. We have more charging stations per capita than any other state. Actually, that statistic came out a short while ago. It's not nearly enough to meet our future market penetration goals for electric vehicles, but it's pretty good. We're under contract now with a company called Blink Charging to build out 11 fast chargers at strategic locations around the state. And these will be built out over the next 2 years. And once they're all operating, we'll have a fast charger within about 30 miles of nearly every address in Vermont. And we're going to go out with an RFP in the next couple of months, probably, for another 6 highway corridor fast charging stations. So we're really making pretty good headway on filling in those gaps. And level 2 charging is also important. And you'll hear more about the EVSE grant program, I think, later this week. So you'll get a deeper dive into this. But the level 2 charging at places like workplaces and tourist destinations and overnight lodging, that is also important. We continue to work on that. There's a provision in this year's administration's transportation bill to fund charging stations at multi-unit dwellings. So that will give people who live in condos and apartments the opportunity to basically charge at home. And one of the things that's happening is that vehicle ranges are increasing. And over the next several years, 300 to 400 mile ranges are going to be, I think, the norm. And when you have that kind of vehicle range, and if you can charge at home or at work, you're set, really. You're really never going to have to go to a public charger unless you're going on a long trip or you're just, for whatever reason, doing a lot of miles, working in sales or something like that. So, short answer, absolutely, charging infrastructure is key, but we are working on it and making good headway.
Question?
yeah.
Yes, Senator Perchlik?
Dan, I took a quick look at your 154-page report. What I didn't see in there is, and maybe it's in there, like a market analysis. So you mentioned the less than 1% of the total vehicles. Do you have, on the top of your head, or maybe Dave does, about what the 2020 percentage of sales were plugins? That's one question. That's one question, just like where we are on that number. And then, did you guys do any kind of market analysis? Like, is the incentive the right place for the market? Like, what impact, or look at free ridership or those kind of things, and other components of the incentive, like the $40,000 maximum, is that the right number? Is the incentive dollar number the right number? Did you guys do that kind of analysis in there, or was it more like, here's what?
Let me take a first crack at those, and then Dave can, correct me or back me up if need be. I think the first question is what the current sales are, and I believe it's about 7% of new passenger vehicles. I don't know what the figure is for all vehicles, but not bad. Needs to be higher. And then in terms of market analysis, we haven't had the capacity to do that. We haven't, been able to do it in-house or at this point hire a contractor, but we have been for some time discussing the need for that kind of research. And we've been in communication with the Transportation Research Center at the University of Vermont. I know they're very interested in this kind of research. We have, for example, equity and environmental justice questions. Just, who is the incentive program reaching? Who is it not reaching? Questions like you had, Senator Perchlik, about whether the incentive amounts are set at the correct level. What's the level of free ridership? How can we do a better job reaching some of the rural counties? We have had a conversation, I think this came up when I testified to House Transportation, and they actually, had similar questions. And so I believe Greg Rowengould he's the director of the Transportation Research Center at the University of Vermont, is scheduled to testify in House Transportation. And if you're interested in this, I'm sure he'd be happy to talk to you. And at this point, it's there's, I guess, discussions happening in the House committee about whether this is the kind of thing that should be funded. I don't, have an administration position on that. I don't know if Michelle does. I could just say that we could certainly benefit from this research. Dave, did you have anything to add there?
Senator Ingalls?
I'll wait till he was going to ask Dave a question.
Sure. Not much. So for the record, David Roberts, I'm a senior consultant and the Drive Electric Vermont coordinator for VEIC. We do have some of the sort of market information on the Drive Electric Vermont website, which I'm happy to pull up and share if folks are interested. But Dan's right. It varies, but it's around 6%, 6 to 7% of new passenger car registrations quarterly. When we look at the data that Drive Electric Vermont receives from Vermont DEC, who in turn get it from Vermont DMV, when you look beyond passenger vehicles, there are, larger trucks are very popular in Vermont. So as a percent of overall vehicle sales, EVs are still probably in the maybe 2 to 3% range. But Vermont has historically had the highest adoption rates on the East Coast, essentially. So the California, Oregon, and Washington typically have had a little higher adoption, California in particular, but Vermont has been doing pretty well compared to peers in the East. And in terms of setting the incentive amounts, my understanding is they were basically set in the legislation, so there wasn't really a lot of study of the types of issues that Senator Perchlik was referring to. Although I do think that when you look at the incentive amounts, they are comparable to what other states in the Northeast have been offering. So in that sense, Vermont isn't doing something that's completely kind of out of scale with the regional market.
Okay, Senator Ingalls?
Back to Senator Maz's questioning about the charging stations. I've been going around and around and around and around and around about how to get a charging station. I've got several friends that have properties as well. For me, it would serve my clientele well. I'm in the real estate business. We do about $30 million of sales a year, and we were always running into people, well, not now, because pre-pandemic, when people were able to come to Vermont, we really had a hard time to get them to come this far north because of the lack of charging stations. And I've talked about this before, but I'm quite convinced that I would be able to master the Mandarin language before I could ever figure out how to get a charging station or to even talk about it. It's just a hard process to get through all of that. And I've talked with 3 different power companies. Senator Kitchell was kind enough to send me some language that her brother was fortunate with. And I don't know if it's just me or what, but I tend to believe that if I'm having a hard time figuring out how to get one of these stations directed locally, that it's going to be a bigger process than what it needs to be. So it's more of a comment than anything. I would just like to see the state put more emphasis on getting these charging stations out. Yes, I see the governor announced 11 new sites the other day, which is great. But I think we could do a lot better. I think we could get a lot more out there if somebody was there to actually help set these stations up versus just getting you the information. And that's kind of where I'm at with that.
Yeah, good question. Who would like to tackle that one?
Dave, do you want to?
I can offer a few remarks. I mean, I think you bring up some excellent points, Senator Ingalls. We do have some information on the Drive Electric Vermont website as well, and I'd be happy to talk with you further. But I think starting with the electric utility is a good strategy. It sounds like you've already gone in that direction. Some of the utilities are starting to figure out some different pilot programs. So Green Mountain Power has just launched a new program that they're piloting where you pay somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe $50 a month on your electric bill, and they'll put in and sort of manage a level 2 charger for you. And so level 2 is the 240 volt, sort of like an electric clothes dryer type of voltage. So they get about 20 miles of range per hour charging with one of those. So it's not the fast charger that the governor just announced.
Mine's more of the commercial aspect of it, the fast chargers. Nobody in the general public has enough time to sit there and 20 minutes or long or less is where it's at. And I just think that there's a lot more. We could do a lot better putting these stations out there if we had somebody really driving this program out there, trying to connect with people. There's a lot of interest in putting these stations in. Mine isn't. I've got some commercial sites. Mine isn't anything to do with me profiting from it. It's really to help my community out and to help. I guess profiting would be on the fact that I could comfortably tell my people when they're allowed to come into the state that don't worry about your electric vehicle. I've got that covered. So I guess I would be profiting from it, but it's not really where it's at. It's more to be helpful. I just think that we can do a better job with it. I think that we can drive this. We can fill these areas with fast charging stations. As far as to get one in my home, I could have one in there fairly quickly. That's pretty simple technology. I just think there's a need to do a better job of getting them in the public out there with people who want to get involved. And again, maybe it's just me, but I think I'm capable in a lot of that area, but I don't think
it's just you. I think the fast charging in particular has a lot of complications that can come into play in terms of like demand charges, peak kilowatt charges that utilities will often charge, although GMP has just announced a program where they're going to be waiving those for fast charging. And just the overall expense of putting in the equipment, the newer models that are higher, faster charging, fast chargers can easily be over $100,000. So, and with the amount of usage that they're currently getting, it's really tough to make a business case that, you know, you will be able to recover those costs without some kind of subsidy. So that's why the state has been making those investments, I think. But obviously, there may be, and Dan has already mentioned, the state does have another 750,000 that they're planning to invest through an RFP process, you know, in the
What's
next
the
few
rate,
months.
what's the rate for, do they have a maximum rate they can charge? Who controls that now? Whether it's so much a kilowatt hour, or this charging station, they all have to follow the same? And my second question would be, sooner or later, we're going to get some of that revenue, I hope. That's what we've been working on, to replace the gas tax. But can they charge what they want when they put in a charging station, or do they have to all say the same price?
It's up to the station owner to determine the pricing, and there was some language passed, I think 2 years ago now, that would allow a station owner to charge by the kilowatt hour and not be regulated as a utility. There's sort of an exception in the law that allows charging by the kilowatt hour. In the case of the charging stations that are receiving state support, I know that the state agency staff have been talking with the who will be the owners of that equipment to make sure that the pricing is reasonable and in line with the market. So, you know, if there's state funds involved, that people aren't going to be gouged. And I know they have some sort of, and Gary Holloway or Dan may be able to speak to this in more detail because I wasn't directly involved, but I know that that has been a concern. So.
Because gasoline, there's so many stations close, you go from one to the other, and they compare. But what if there's just one within, 50, 60 miles, and you say, okay, I got to pay. I mean, I don't know what I'm paying, but that would, and I know gasoline is free enterprise, which is great, but there's so many hundreds of stations that they control what their competitor is getting, and everybody's trying. I'm just wondering how they're going to control that, because if there's limited amounts of stations or power places, they could really do a job on consumer, I guess. I don't know. I'm just trying to find that stuff out.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
we're trying to move toward a free market system. So there's, I don't think anyone, in the state agencies is interested in essentially regulating pricing at charging stations. But when we provide public funding to support charging stations, we do have an agreement on the basic price structure. So we make sure that there's some fairness involved, and the price structure can be changed, but it needs to be changed in consultation with the agencies. So, it's a sort of a compromise approach at this point. There's no sort of state regulation of the pricing. When we have a grant agreement, we can provide some boundaries within that document.
And one more question, is a fast charging station more costly to install? And that's why, that's the difference, because everybody wants fast.
Yeah, it's expensive. We're talking about maybe in the grant program we're running for the weakest power station, we would call a fast charging station, would be 50 kilowatts. And it probably costs about $100,000 of state funding to support that. So, that's the lowest level. We're also funding some 175 kilowatt stations, and Electrify America is putting in super fast charging stations. I think they're 350 kilowatts. Is that right, Dave?
Up to, depending on the location. Not every location does that.
It's like a 110 versus 220. I'm sure it costs you more for the line to put it in. And the higher you go,
the higher the power of the station, the more expensive it gets, and then you get demand charge issues. But a 350 kilowatt hour station, and most cars can't even accept that charge, and there aren't many of those stations around yet. But that's where it's going to go eventually, and that'll get you 400 miles of range in 20 minutes. So it's like a filling station model.
Yeah.
But it's really, it's about money at this point until the market can take over. And that's one of the reasons why it's been so difficult. It's both the cost of getting these stations in, running them with the demand charges and so forth, and then also getting the word out to the public through Drive Electric Vermont. And the draft T bill does, have language in for more education and outreach and more charging infrastructure.
Senator Chittenden, did you have a question?
It's a very naive question, but I didn't read the 154-page report. So you just said it to be like the filling stations, but I got to tell you, if 20 minutes, that's a lot of time. I would think that, are we trying to place these at places where people tend to spend more time, like supermarkets, as opposed to the traditional filling station? Because it seems like 20 minutes is where I would spend walking an aisle, but I don't think stopping at a gas station for 20 minutes.
Well, in the grant program, fast chargers are required to be installed in places that have, for example, cell service, 24-hour, 7 days a week access, nearby amenities like restrooms, someplace to get some food, something like that. So, we're not putting these just out in the middle of nowhere where folks won't have anything to do. So, there is the idea that maybe, people can use their time productively or to relax while they're charging their vehicle.
Would they have one plug in there, or they have 4 or 5? Because if you drove up and the guy's just started 20 minutes, you got really 40 minutes. So there'd be
Again, it's an affordability issue. I believe the stations that we're funding have 2 fast charging ports. So Dave's nodding, that's correct. And there's also backup level 2 on all these stations.
Okay.
And where we fund level 2 chargers, that would be at places with longer dwell times. So, workplaces, tourist destinations, overnight lodging, places like that.
Senator Kitchell?
Well, I just thought I'd speak up so I hadn't passed to the great beyond. A lot of charging stations also are done by corporate. So if you wanted to go to Wyoming, Walmart is where you are going to see a lot of them, or Whole Foods, or even in Vermont, Hannaford's and Bradford. So they do tend to be in locations where people can go and shop or do something while they're waiting. But sometimes they are only one station, because my son has an EV and he drives to Providence, Newport, Rhode Island. And so he knows where they all are. So you have to plan, and it does take additional time. There's no question about that, if you're doing multiple charges on a trip. But it's interesting, where a lot of them have been cited, and they are, I think, because of that corporate sponsorship, where there's some advantage to the business. So that's the other part. Out of the 11, I know St. Johnsbury was one. Is Newport one of these sites as well?
Newport, Vermont, yes.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was.
But let's say you have 4 outside of Walmart or 5 outside of Walmart, and people go in shopping and the 20 minutes is up and they're in there for a half hour or 45 minutes. Isn't their car still hooked up?
Well, yep. And that can be dealt with in a couple of ways. If it's a fast charger, you would typically have a holdover fee. It doesn't have to kick in right away, but there would be some kind of fee that would be charged once you stop charging.
Okay,
It would incentivize you to
you
move
could
your
tie up
car.
those things for an hour or so while you're gone, and then that's the other person's waiting there and they can't get in because that person's shopping or eating lunch or whatever. It's
Right.
the problem, I thought. But
Yeah. So you'd pay a holdover charge for something like that, and that would get you to move your car. If it's a level 2 charger, depending on the location, it might be okay to leave your car there. Like if we put level 2s in at park and rides or something like that, you can't expect people to come back and move the car. So lots to be worked out for sure.
okay. Any further questions? Okay, well, thank you. Anything else? Who wants to speak next? We've got someone else that would like to. Dan, anybody else that you have, or?
Dave, is there anything you want to add on the new PEV incentive program?
I don't know. I mean, I did have some remarks, but I
Go
don't
right ahead.
have to run through them.
No, go right ahead. Go ahead. You got
Okay.
time.
So a little bit of background about Drive Electric Vermont. Dan's already talked about it, but it's basically a public-private partnership that is coordinated by VEIC, where I work. We're a nonprofit based in Winooski. We work with state agencies, the electric utilities, other non-governmental organizations, the auto dealers, folks in the EV industry to advance transportation electrification in the state. We've got more of a sort of consumer-facing website and resources at driveelectricvt.com. And on there, we have information on the sort of variety of incentives that are available for folks, including the federal tax credit, the state of Vermont incentive, and the electric utility incentives. And just this week, we launched a new sort of calculator tool that allows somebody to put in the type of vehicle, their income, and some other parameters to try to get an estimate of what incentives they might be eligible for. So because there's so many incentives and different requirements with all of them, it can be confusing for consumers to navigate those issues. So we're happy to have that new tool available. We've already talked some about the different incentives for all electric versus plug-in hybrid, and then there are higher incentives for lower income. That was changed last summer into the income eligibility requirements. Instead of being based on total household income, were changed to adjusted gross income and your tax filing status. And we have information on those details on the Drive Electric website and in the report Dan filed. The two options to claim, the dealership or consumer direct, Dan has described. We're fortunate to have some excellent partners in the auto dealers across the state, and Marilyn Miller at the Vermont Auto Dealers Association has been very helpful in doing outreach to her members to get them engaged and able to offer those point of sale incentives. Not every dealer participates. It's an opt-in program, so that is an important reason to still be able to offer those consumer direct incentive options as well. So for either a dealer that's not participating, or in some cases, Vermonters may want to buy an EV at an out-of-state dealer, especially if they live in a part of the state where maybe there's a dealer in Lebanon, New Hampshire, Keene, New Hampshire, or New York that's closer to them or that they prefer. So having that direct option is helpful. And so far, it's about a third of the incentives that have been paid out have been through that customer direct option. On the lower income side, it's been about half of the incentives that have been paid out have been for the lower income, and it's about almost 2/3 of the funding. So that is an important consideration. And from what we see, Vermont has been a leader, at least on the East Coast, in addressing those kind of equity issues, making sure that these incentive programs are structured in ways that at least some of the more moderate income folks can speak to it. I know Capstone is going to be speaking next about some of the work that they're doing with low income folks and more efficient vehicles. The Chevrolet Bolt has been the most popular model receiving state incentives, followed by the Nissan Leaf. And if you navigate your way through Dan's extensive report, starting on page 135 of that PDF, there's a memo that we put together that provides more of a breakdown of the different incentives for different vehicles and the income and all of those things. Currently, through our sort of reporting function that we're offering through Drive Electric Vermont, we're seeing somewhere in the neighborhood of about $125,000 a month in incentives, and it's currently $508,000 remaining. So if we keep up with that track, that'd be maybe 3 to 4 months of funding based on the current appropriation.
And that's just new cars, right?
That is just new cars for this program. That's right. And Dan has mentioned, but the lapse in funding that occurred last fall, so in October, was definitely a challenge, just in terms of engaging with dealers, and there has been some confusion. We've had a few consumers who thought they would be eligible for an incentive, and it turned out they weren't because they purchased during a time when the program was suspended. So to the extent that we can avoid those issues, certainly highly recommend that we try to do that. And I believe you're going to be hearing from some of the folks from Efficiency Vermont later this week to speak to some of the work they're going to be doing under Act 151. And as a little background, VEIC is the overarching nonprofit that oversees both Drive Electric Vermont as well as Efficiency Vermont. So through the program that they're going to be providing more information on, we hope to have more resources to support some of the consumer education outreach work that Drive Electric Vermont has been doing.
I've been kind of surprised. I follow the big truck industry across the country, and there's so many big truck companies that are manufacturing electric now, Volvo and some of the big ones, and so that's going to be a big factor. Those rigs are going to be using some electricity. They need coast to coast too, because I don't know if they're building hybrids in those, but I know electric is a big factor, and I'm sure they take a lot of juice in those trucks when they
Yeah, the fast charging for those can be, as Dan was saying, the sort of max limit these days is 350 kilowatts, and
Okay.
I think that they're piloting even faster charging for some of those heavy duty vehicles.
Right,
So
right.
that is certainly going to be an issue moving forward.
Well, they're all looking at the maintenance, and the maintenance is so much less on electric than they are on diesels, and there's not much that goes wrong with them other than the batteries and the brakes and things like that. So, well, very good. Yes, Senator Perklick.
Mr. Roberts, on the Drive Electric website, you're just providing information on the state incentives, not on the utility incentives? I thought you did have utility incentives on there.
We are, and I don't know, Liz, is it possible that I can, I see, I'll try to share my screen here.
Here's my question, is I was just looking at it, and on the list of cars available, you don't show vehicles, you only show the vehicles that can get the state incentive. So there are incentives available for some of those other vehicles, but it's only through the utility. So I wonder.
So for example, if you are a Green Mountain Power customer and you're getting a new all electric vehicle.
That's only if you do that. Like if you just go to the website and say, I want to look at the vehicles, if you go back and just where it says explore vehicles.
Yep.
And you say, go up to vehicle type and say all electric. So let's say, look at the Ford Mustang, that says no incentives, but there are incentives, but you just have to be a Green Mountain customer.
Right. It doesn't, I don't know, we might be able to do a better job with this. We do have the federal tax credit amount here. We don't list the utility incentives because they vary.
Right.
We just don't say that it's eligible for a state incentive. So a vehicle that is,
right.
Maybe we should say state of Vermont incentive eligible, or find a better way of describing that.
Yeah, just an asterisk or something, so they know that there might be Vermont incentives available for these other vehicles.
Sure, from other parties beyond
from
the
other
state.
Parties. There's the state incentive, and then there's these other incentives. And since your site has all that information, because I think this is the place most people go. Well, that's just maybe me, and so I thought it would be good to have some way that they know there are incentives for those other vehicles.
Yes, thank you for that. Yep, good point.
Okay, any further questions at this time? Well, thank you very much. It was very educational this morning, and we'll take a 10-minute break, committee, and move on to our next subject. Unless there's further questions. Any other questions? I'm sorry.
People can spend their 10 minutes on the break looking at the Drive Electric website. It's a great website.
Okay.
Or Dan's 154-page report.
It's only 11 pages. It's all the attachments that are long.
Okay, we'll see you all at 10:05. Or 10:05. Okay. Thank you.